My name is Sofia Martinez, though everyone calls me Sophie. I'm 29 years old, and 3 months ago, my life changed forever when my grandmother's lawyer called to tell me I had inherited her entire estate worth $2.8 million. As I sat in that sterile law office, staring at documents that would transform my modest existence into one of financial freedom, one thought consumed me. I would tell absolutely no one about this inheritance. Not yet. You see, I have a complicated relationship with my family when it comes to money and expectations. If you're reading this story, I hope it resonates with your own experiences of family dynamics and the painful lessons we sometimes learn about the people we love. Before I share what happened when I decided to test my family's true character, let me tell you about the life I was living before everything changed. Before that fateful phone call, my life was predictably ordinary in the way that only financial instability can make ordinary. I worked as a graphic designer at a small advertising agency in Denver called Creative Solutions, a name that promised more innovation than the company actually delivered. The office occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse building, with exposed brick walls that looked trendy, but made the space cold in winter and stifling in summer. My cubicle sat near a window that faced the alley behind a chain restaurant, offering me a daily view of dumpsters and delivery trucks. The fluorescent lighting cast everything in a harsh, unflattering glow that made even the most vibrant designs look washed out. But it was work, and in the creative field, steady work was not something to take for granted. Every morning, I would wake up at 6:30 in my studio apartment, a 450-square-foot space that I had learned to maximize through careful furniture arrangement and vertical storage solutions. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had been constructed in the 1970s, and the elevator worked sporadically. On the days it was broken, the climb up 4 flights of stairs with grocery bags or art supplies served as an unwelcome reminder of how little control I had over my environment. My morning routine was efficient out of necessity. I would make instant coffee in the single mug I owned that wasn't chipped, toast bread from the day-old rack at the grocery store, and check my bank balance on my phone while eating breakfast, standing at my small counter. This daily financial check-in was both compulsive and masochistic. I always knew roughly what would be there, but the confirmation of my limited resources started each day with a familiar weight of anxiety. The commute to work took 35 minutes on public transportation, a bus route that wound through neighborhoods that told the story of Denver's economic disparities. I would board in my modest area of small apartment buildings and chain stores, pass through the gentrifying districts where coffee shops charged $6 for drinks I couldn't afford, and finally arrive in the downtown area where office workers in expensive suits emerged from parking structures that cost more per month than I spent on groceries. During these bus rides, I developed the habit of sketching in a small notebook, capturing faces of fellow passengers or architectural details from buildings we passed. This was both a creative outlet and a coping mechanism. Focusing on drawing helped quiet the anxiety that often accompanied thoughts about money, career prospects, and the growing gap between my artistic ambitions and my financial reality. At Creative Solutions, my official title was Junior Graphic Designer, a designation I had held for 3 years despite taking on increasingly complex projects and clients. My boss, Marcus Reynolds, was a man in his early 50s who had built the agency from nothing in the 1990s, but had gradually become more focused on maintaining profit margins and nurturing creativity or talent. Marcus had a habit of assigning the most interesting projects to his nephew, Tyler, who had joined the agency straight out of college with a degree in business rather than design. Tyler's portfolio consisted mainly of class assignments and one internship at his father's real estate company. But his family connection guaranteed him access to the creative briefs that could actually advance a career. Meanwhile, I handled what Marcus called bread and butter work. Corporate brochures for HVAC companies, social media graphics for local restaurants, and promotional materials for small businesses whose owners wanted something professional but not too expensive. This work paid my bills, but did nothing to build the kind of portfolio that would help me advance in the industry. My colleague Jennifer Walsh had mastered the art of taking credit for collaborative ideas without technically lying about her contributions. She had a talent for positioning herself as the creative lead during client presentations, while acknowledging my support in ways that made me sound like an assistant rather than a collaborator. Jennifer had been at the agency for 5 years and earned nearly twice my salary, despite what I privately believed was inferior creative instinct and technical skill. The office dynamic was complicated by the fact that everyone knew salaries were uneven and advancement opportunities were limited. But discussing these issues openly was discouraged. Marcus preferred what he called a family atmosphere, which in practice meant that complaints about unfair treatment were framed as disloyalty rather than legitimate workplace concerns. Despite feeling undervalued and underpaid, I continued working diligently because the alternative, freelancing without a financial safety net, felt impossibly risky. I had tried building a client base on the side, but the feast or famine nature of freelance work made it difficult to maintain consistent income while working full-time. I took online courses to improve my skills, staying up late after work to learn new software programs and design techniques. I maintained professional relationships with local business owners, hoping that exceptional service would lead to referrals and repeat business. But the agency's commission structure meant that any clients I brought in became company assets rather than personal contacts I could eventually take with me. My one small indulgence was art supplies. Every month, I would budget $50 for new paints, brushes, or sketch picks, a ritual that represented hope and possibility in a life that often felt constrained by practical limitations. I would spend an hour at the art store, carefully considering each purchase, weighing the cost against the potential for creative inspiration. These monthly trips to Mountain Art Supply became a form of meditation. The store occupied a converted house in the Arts District, with rooms devoted to different mediums, watercolors in the sunny front parlor, oils and acrylics in the spacious back room, sculpture materials in the basement. The owners, an elderly couple named Frank and Marie, knew every customer by name and could recommend materials based on individual artistic goals and budgets. Frank had been a professional painter before opening the store, and he would sometimes look through my sketchbooks when I brought them in, offering gentle critiques and suggestions for techniques that might enhance my work. These conversations were among the few times I felt seen and encouraged as an artist, rather than just as someone who happened to work in a creative field. My art supplies lived in a repurposed closet in my apartment that I had converted into a makeshift studio. I had installed LED lighting and painted the walls white to maximize the small space. A folding table served as an easel, and I had built shelves to hold canvases, brushes, and paints in organized rows that made the tiny space feel professional, despite its limitations. Working in this closet studio became my primary source of joy and frustration. The space was too small for large canvases, the ventilation was poor, and I had to clean up completely after each painting session to avoid overwhelming the apartment with fumes. But it was mine, the only space in my life where I could create without compromise or consideration for others' opinions or commercial viability. I had dreams that seemed increasingly distant as I approached 30. I wanted to travel to art museums in Europe, to stand before paintings I had only seen in books and understand how they were constructed, how the brushstrokes created light and shadow, how centuries-old techniques could still move viewers to tears. I imagined taking a sabbatical to focus entirely on my own artwork, renting a real studio with north-facing windows and enough space to step back and view large canvases from a distance. I dreamed of exhibiting in local galleries, not necessarily to become famous or wealthy, but to connect with other people through visual storytelling and emotional expression. I wanted to move to a larger apartment with a dedicated studio space where I could host art nights with friends, where we could paint and drink wine and discuss creativity without worrying about cleanup or neighbors' complaints about noise. I envisioned a life where financial security provided the mental space for risk-taking and artistic experimentation. But these dreams felt impossible when I was living paycheck to paycheck, carefully budgeting every expense and calculating whether I could afford to say yes to dinner invitations or weekend trips with friends. I had mastered the art of appearing financially stable while constantly juggling bills and prioritizing which expenses could be delayed until the next month. I knew exactly which grocery stores had the best prices on everything from produce to household supplies. I clipped digital coupons, shot sales, and planned meals around what was marked down for quick sale. My pantry was stocked with generic brands and bulk purchases that maximize nutritional value per dollar spent. My car was a 12-year-old Honda Civic that I had bought used with money borrowed from 3 different credit cards. It needed expensive repairs more frequently than I could comfortably afford, but replacing it was financially impossible. I had learned basic maintenance from YouTube videos and kept a detailed log of every issue to help predict and budget for future problems. The car had become a symbol of my precarious financial situation, reliable enough to get me to work, but old enough that any major repair would require difficult choices between transportation and other necessities. I drove carefully, maintained it obsessively, and kept a small emergency fund specifically for automotive expenses. Dating was complicated by financial constraints in ways that were difficult to explain to potential partners. I couldn't afford to eat at the restaurants where professional people my age met for dates, couldn't reciprocate expensive gestures, and was always conscious of the cost when someone suggested activities like concerts or weekend trips. I had ended a promising relationship 6 months earlier when it became clear that David, a marketing manager at a tech company, expected a level of financial participation in our social life that I couldn't maintain without going into debt. He wasn't intentionally insensitive, but his assumptions about disposable income and spontaneous spending revealed a gap between our lifestyles that felt unbridgeable. The loneliness was sometimes overwhelming, but dating seemed to require either finding someone in a similar financial situation or constantly explaining why I couldn't participate in the activities that people in their late 20s typically enjoyed together. Both options felt exhausting in different ways. My family situation was complicated by decades of financial stress, divorce, remarriage, and competing priorities that had created lasting patterns of dysfunction around money and support. My parents, Elena and Roberto Martinez, had divorced when I was 16 after years of increasingly bitter fights about money, priorities, and what constituted responsible financial planning. Elena worked as a registered nurse at Denver Presbyterian Hospital, often picking up extra shifts to supplement her income, but exhausting herself in the process. Roberto worked as an automotive mechanic at an independent shop, taking pride in his technical skills, but struggling with the business aspects of generating consistent income. Their marriage had been undermined by fundamental disagreements about financial priorities. Elena wanted to save for long-term goals like homeownership and our college educations, while Roberto preferred to address immediate needs and occasional splurges that he felt rewarded his hard work. Neither approach was inherently wrong, but their inability to compromise or communicate effectively about money created constant tension. The divorce proceedings were expensive and acrimonious, involving lawyers who seemed more interested in billable hours than in helping 2 working-class parents separate their assets fairly. By the time the legal process was complete, both Elena and Roberto had accumulated debt that would take years to repay, and their relationship had deteriorated to the point where civil conversation was impossible. My mother remarried quickly, within 18 months of the divorce finalization, to David Richardson, a successful general contractor who owned his own business and had never been married before. David was kind to Elena and treated her well, but he had made it clear from the beginning that supporting his new wife's adult children financially was not part of his plans for their future together. David's position wasn't necessarily unreasonable. He was 52 when he married Elena, had worked hard to build his business and savings, and wanted to enjoy financial freedom with his new wife, rather than taking on additional dependence. But his boundaries created an awkward dynamic, where Elena felt caught between her loyalty to her children and her desire to maintain harmony in her new marriage. Roberto remained single after the divorce, claiming that he was focusing on rebuilding his finances and didn't want the complications of another relationship. But I suspected that the divorce had left him emotionally guarded and reluctant to risk another situation where financial disagreements could destroy a partnership. He lived in a small apartment near the auto shop where he worked, driving a succession of old cars that he repaired and maintained himself. Roberto took pride in his self-sufficiency, but sometimes seemed lonely in ways that he couldn't acknowledge directly. He would call his children with practical questions or offers to help with car maintenance, conversations that felt like attempts at connection disguised as utility. My siblings added additional complexity to the family financial dynamics. Carlos, my younger brother, was 26 and had followed what everyone considered the smart path: business school, corporate job, marriage to a college sweetheart, suburban house, children. He worked as a consultant for a firm that specialized in helping companies optimize their supply chains, earning a salary that allowed for a lifestyle that the rest of the family admired but couldn't replicate. Carlos had married Maria Gonzalez during his final year of business school, and their wedding had been a source of significant stress for the family. The couple had expectations for their celebration that required financial contributions from parents and siblings who were already stretched thin, but their requests were framed as family obligations rather than optional gifts. I had put $1,500 on my credit card to help with catering costs, money that I was still paying off 3 years later, despite Carlos and Maria's promises to reimburse everyone once they received their wedding gifts. The fact that they had used their gift money for a European honeymoon instead of repaying family members was a source of ongoing resentment that no one discussed openly. Carlos and Maria lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a suburb that represented everything they had worked toward: good schools, low crime, property values that appreciated steadily over time. They drove matching SUVs, took annual vacations, and seemed to have achieved the American dream that eluded the rest of us. But their success came with an attitude that was sometimes difficult to tolerate. Carlos had developed a habit of offering unsolicited financial advice to family members, suggesting that our struggles were the result of poor planning rather than limited resources. He spoke about budgeting and investing as if they were simple matters of discipline, failing to acknowledge that his recommendations assumed disposable income that most of us didn't have. Maria had grown up in a middle-class family and seemed genuinely confused by the financial stress that characterized much of our extended family. She would make comments about how everyone should have an emergency fund, or suggest that family members could improve their situations by making better choices, displaying a lack of understanding about how poverty constrains options and creates cycles that are difficult to break. My older sister Isabella presented different challenges. At 33, she had spent most of her adult life cycling through relationships, jobs, and living situations in patterns that suggested underlying issues with impulse control and long-term planning. Isabella was charming, intelligent, and creative, but she had a talent for making decisions that created immediate excitement while ignoring potential consequences. She would quit jobs before securing new ones, move in with romantic partners she had known for weeks, and make financial commitments based on optimistic projections rather than current reality. Her romantic relationships followed predictable patterns: intense beginnings, rapid escalation to cohabitation or financial entanglement, followed by dramatic endings that usually left Isabella needing emergency assistance with housing, transportation, or debt. She had lived with me twice during relationship crises, stays that were supposed to be temporary but extended for months while she figured things out. The most painful aspect of Isabella's pattern was that she genuinely seemed to forget the help she received once her immediate crisis was resolved. When she needed money for a security deposit on an apartment after her latest relationship ended, I emptied my emergency fund to help her, only to discover weeks later that she had spent the money on a vacation with her new boyfriend instead of securing stable housing. When I confronted her about the misuse of the money, Isabella acted genuinely surprised that I was upset. She explained that her new boyfriend had offered to let her move in with him, making the apartment unnecessary, and she had assumed I would want her to be happy rather than follow through on the original plan. Her logic had an internal consistency that made it difficult to argue against, but it left me feeling manipulated and foolish for trusting her. These experiences with immediate family members had taught me to be cautious about mixing money with relationships, but they had also created guilt about setting boundaries. When someone you love is in crisis, the impulse to help is strong, even when experience suggests that help will be wasted or unappreciated. My extended family presented additional layers of complexity around money, status, and mutual support. These relationships had been shaped by decades of immigration history, economic mobility, and changing cultural expectations about family obligations. My Aunt Carmen, my mother's younger sister, was perhaps the most genuine person in our entire extended family. At 45, she worked 2 jobs, full-time as a housekeeper at a downtown hotel and weekends as a caterer for small events, like birthday parties and graduation celebrations. Carmen had been a single mother since her daughter Anna was 2 years old, when Anna's father decided that parenthood was incompatible with his career ambitions, and moved to California without providing forwarding information. Rather than become bitter or seek sympathy, Carmen had quietly rebuilt her life around the goal of providing stability and opportunity for her daughter. Her apartment was small but immaculately maintained, decorated with Anna's artwork and photographs of family celebrations that Carmen had catered. She drove a 15-year-old Toyota that she kept running through a combination of careful maintenance, YouTube tutorials, and relationships with mechanics who were willing to accept payment plans for major repairs. What made Carmen special was her ability to find joy and create beauty, despite financial constraints that would have overwhelmed many people. She grew herbs and vegetables in containers on her apartment balcony, sewed many of her own clothes, and had taught herself to bake elaborate cakes that were the highlight of every family celebration. Carmen never complained about her circumstances or asked for help, but she was always available when other family members needed support. She would arrive at family crises with homemade food, practical assistance, and emotional presence that made difficult situations more manageable. Anna, now 17, was a remarkable young woman who had inherited her mother's resilience and work ethic while developing her own intellectual gifts. She maintained a 4.0 GPA while working part-time at a local bookstore, participated in her school's robotics team, and had already been accepted to several universities with partial scholarships. The tragedy was that Anna's college options were limited by financial constraints rather than academic ability. She could attend a local community college and transfer after 2 years, or accept substantial student loan debt to attend a 4-year university immediately. Neither option would provide the full college experience that her intelligence and achievements deserved. Watching Anna navigate these limitations was heartbreaking, particularly because other family members with greater resources seemed oblivious to her situation. Carlos and Maria had started a college fund for their own children when they were born, but had never offered to contribute to Anna's education, despite their comfortable income. Uncle Miguel, who owned a successful business, had never even inquired about Anna's college plans. On the opposite end of the economic spectrum was my Uncle Miguel, my father's older brother, who had built a successful landscaping business over 20 years of hard work and savvy investing. Miguel employed 15 people, owned commercial property, and had achieved the kind of financial success that made him the unofficial family patriarch. Miguel's success story was genuinely impressive. He had arrived from Mexico with minimal English and no capital, worked as a day laborer for several years, slowly built a client base through exceptional work and reliability, and eventually expanded into commercial landscaping contracts that provided steady, substantial income. But success had made Miguel judgmental about other family members' financial struggles. He frequently lectured relatives about the importance of hard work, savings, and making smart choices, as if everyone had access to the same opportunities and resources that had enabled his success. Miguel's wife, Patricia, had grown up in an upper-middle-class family and brought different cultural assumptions about money and status to their marriage. Patricia was not intentionally cruel, but she had opinions about lifestyle choices and career decisions that revealed how little she understood about the constraints that shaped other family members' lives. Patricia would make comments about my impractical career choice, suggesting that I should consider more stable fields like teaching or nursing. She seemed genuinely puzzled by my continued work in graphic design, as if artistic pursuits were inherently frivolous, rather than legitimate career paths that happened to be financially unstable. Their son Diego presented a different kind of frustration. At 28, he had inherited his father's business ambitions, but none of his discipline or work ethic. Diego was charming and intelligent, always developing elaborate plans for entrepreneurial ventures that would make him wealthy without requiring the grinding daily work that had built his father's success. Diego had started and abandoned a food truck business, a house-flipping venture, and an online marketing company, each time moving on to the next opportunity when the current project required more sustained effort than he was willing to invest. Despite his pattern of failure, he maintained supreme confidence in his next idea and was always looking for family members to provide initial funding or support. What made Diego particularly frustrating was his tendency to criticize other family members' financial decisions while consistently making poor choices himself. He had borrowed money from relatives that he conveniently forgot to repay, justified by his belief that his eventual success would benefit everyone who had supported him. The extended family dynamics were further complicated by different attitudes toward money that reflected generational and cultural differences. The older generation, particularly those who had immigrated from Mexico, valued financial security and conservative spending over risk-taking or lifestyle inflation. Abuela Rosa, my grandmother, exemplified this philosophy. She had worked multiple jobs throughout her life, saved obsessively, and invested cautiously in ways that had gradually built substantial wealth over decades. But she lived modestly, driving old cars, wearing clothes until they wore out, and finding entertainment in free or low-cost activities. Rosa's approach to money was shaped by memories of genuine poverty and uncertainty, experiences that made financial security feel fragile even when it was well established. She had lived through periods when losing a job or facing a medical emergency could mean homelessness or hunger, and those memories influenced every financial decision she made. The younger generation had different expectations and priorities. Carlos and Maria wanted to enjoy their success through lifestyle choices that reflected their education and professional status. Diego expected rapid wealth accumulation that would allow for luxury consumption without delayed gratification. These generational differences created tension during family gatherings, where conversations about money revealed fundamentally different values and assumptions about financial responsibility, family obligations, and the relationship between work and reward. My personal relationships had been shaped significantly by financial constraints and the stress that accompanies economic instability. Dating, friendships, and professional relationships all carried undertones of monetary concern that influenced my behavior in ways I was only beginning to understand. My friendship with Jasmine Chen had survived since our college years in the graphic design program, largely because we shared similar values and financial circumstances. Jasmine worked as an art teacher at Roosevelt Middle School, a position that provided steady employment and health benefits, but a salary that made lifestyle choices a constant series of budget calculations. We had bonded initially over our shared frustration with classmates who treated expensive art supplies and software as casual purchases while we carefully shared materials and saved for months to afford professional-level tools. Our friendship was built on mutual understanding of what it meant to choose passion over financial security, while still needing to pay rent and buy groceries. Jasmine understood the complexity of family financial dynamics because she faced similar challenges with her own relatives. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan and built a successful restaurant, but their expectations for their daughter's career path didn't align with her artistic ambitions. They viewed teaching as a compromise between financial stability and creative fulfillment. Acceptable, but not impressive. Our conversations often centered around the tension between artistic integrity and commercial viability, the challenge of maintaining creative energy while working jobs that drained mental and emotional resources, and the difficulty of building romantic relationships when financial stress influenced every major decision. Jasmine was the only person who knew the full extent of my family's financial dysfunction and my growing resentment about the pattern of one-sided support that had characterized my relationships with siblings and extended family members. She had witnessed my stress during Isabella's various crises and my frustration after lending money that was never repaid. "You know what's fascinating about fair-weather friends and family?" Jasmine had said during one of our monthly coffee meetings at a cafe where we could nurse single drinks for hours without feeling pressured to order more. "The only way to know who really cares about you is to see who sticks around when you have nothing to offer them." Her observation had planted a seed that would eventually grow into the experiment I conducted after receiving my inheritance. But at the time, it was simply one of many conversations we had about the challenge of distinguishing between genuine care and opportunistic relationships. My dating life had been significantly impacted by financial constraints in ways that were difficult to explain to potential partners without sounding defensive or bitter. The men I met through work or social activities typically had professional jobs that provided disposable income for restaurants, concerts, weekend trips, and other activities that people in their late 20s used to build romantic connections. My inability to reciprocate expensive gestures or participate equally in costly activities created an imbalance that was difficult to navigate. Some men interpreted my budget consciousness as lack of interest, while others seemed to enjoy the dynamic of being the financially dominant partner in ways that felt uncomfortable and patronizing. I had ended my most promising recent relationship with David Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, when it became clear that our different financial situations were creating expectations and resentments that neither of us could address constructively. David worked as a marketing manager for a tech startup and earned a salary that allowed for lifestyle choices I couldn't afford. He wasn't intentionally insensitive about money, but his assumptions about normal recreational spending revealed the gap between our economic realities. When he suggested weekend trips to mountain resorts or expensive restaurants for special occasions, I would try to propose alternatives that fit my budget. Hiking and picnic lunches instead of spa weekends, cooking dinner at home instead of trying the new restaurant everyone was discussing. But these substitutions felt like constant negotiations that drained the spontaneity and joy from our relationship. The breaking point came when David's company had a holiday party at an upscale hotel, and he assumed I would buy a new dress for the occasion. When I mentioned that I was planning to wear something I already owned, he offered to buy me something new, a gesture that was meant to be generous but felt condescending. I tried to explain that accepting expensive clothing from someone I had been dating for only a few months felt inappropriate and that I preferred to contribute equally to our relationship expenses. But David seemed genuinely confused by my position, interpreting my independence as stubborn pride rather than financial necessity. Our conversation revealed that he had fundamentally misunderstood my situation. He thought I was choosing to be careful with money rather than being constrained by limited income, and his attempts to be generous felt like solutions to problems I hadn't asked him to solve. Jennifer, in particular, seemed to view my budget consciousness as evidence of poor life management rather than income constraints. She would make comments about how everyone should treat themselves sometimes, or suggest that I was too focused on saving money when I declined expensive group activities. These workplace dynamics created a cycle where financial limitations reduced my access to relationship-building opportunities, which in turn limited my professional advancement prospects, which reinforced the economic constraints that had created the problem initially. The call from attorney James Patterson came on a Tuesday in March that had started like any other workday. I had spent the morning revising a brochure design for a heating and cooling company, making endless small adjustments based on feedback from a client who couldn't articulate what he wanted, but was certain that each iteration wasn't quite right. Marcus had assigned me to this project specifically because he knew I had the patience to handle difficult clients without losing my temper or billing excessive revision time that would hurt the agency's profit margins. It was the kind of work that paid the bills but offered no creative satisfaction or portfolio value. I was packing up my desk at the end of the day, looking forward to spending the evening painting in my closet studio, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something about the timing made me answer. Miss Martinez, this is attorney James Patterson from Patterson, Williams & Associates. I'm calling regarding your grandmother Rosa Martinez's estate. The words hit me with unexpected emotional force. Abuela Rosa had passed away 6 weeks earlier, and while I had grieved her loss deeply, I had assumed that her estate matters were being handled by my father and his siblings. Rosa had always been very private about her finances, and none of us knew exactly what assets she had accumulated over her lifetime. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the will and your inheritance. Would you be available to come to our offices this week? I assumed this was a formality involving some small bequest, perhaps a piece of jewelry or a few $1,000s that Rosa had set aside for her grandchildren. I scheduled the appointment for Thursday afternoon, requesting time off from work and preparing myself for what I imagined would be a brief, formal meeting about a modest inheritance. Patterson, Williams & Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown office building, the kind of space that suggested successful corporate clients and substantial legal fees. The lobby was decorated with original artwork and furniture that probably cost more than I earned in a year, creating an atmosphere of quiet prosperity that made me conscious of my discount department store clothing and scuffed shoes. Attorney Patterson was a man in his early 60s with the kind of calm, professional demeanor that suggested decades of experience delivering both good and bad news to clients. His office overlooked the mountains west of Denver, and the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows gave the room a warmth that contrasted with my anxiety about this unexpected meeting. Miss Martinez, thank you for coming in. Please, have a seat. He gestured to a leather chair across from his mahogany desk, which was covered with neat stacks of documents and files that suggested busy but organized legal practice. I have some surprising news about your grandmother's estate that I think you'll want to discuss privately. Patterson slid a folder across the desk toward me, and I could see my name written on the tab in Rosa's careful handwriting. Inside were documents that I initially couldn't process: bank statements, investment account summaries, life insurance policies, and real estate deeds that represented amounts of money I had never seen outside of lottery winner news stories. Your grandmother has left you her entire estate, Patterson said, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. The house, her investment portfolio, savings accounts, and life insurance policy. The total value is approximately $2.8 million. I stared at the papers, reading and rereading the numbers, without being able to make them feel real. The investment accounts alone contained more money than I could reasonably expect to earn in my entire working lifetime. The life insurance policy was worth $500,000. The house, which I had always assumed was modestly valuable, was appraised at $380,000. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. "Did you say million? There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Patterson assured me. "Your grandmother was very specific in her will about how she wanted the estate distributed. She also left detailed instructions about the management of her investments and a personal letter for you." He handed me an envelope with my name written in Rosa's handwriting, the careful cursive that I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas notes throughout my childhood. My hands were trembling as I opened it, and the letter inside brought immediate tears to my eyes. "My dearest Sofia, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you, but I hope my final gift will give you the freedom to pursue your dreams without the financial fears that held me back for so many years. I have watched you struggle to balance your artistic soul with practical needs, and I see so much of myself in your determination and kindness. I came to this country with nothing but hope and the willingness to work hard for a better future. Over the decades, I saved every penny I could, invested carefully, and denied myself many pleasures because I remembered what it felt like to be hungry and afraid. But as I grew older, I realized that security without purpose is not much of a legacy. I am leaving everything to you because I trust you to use this gift wisely. You have always been generous with others, sometimes to our own detriment, and I worry that this inheritance might make you a target for those who see opportunity rather than family. Please be careful with your heart and your resources. I have watched our family for many years, and I have seen who gives freely when they have little and who asks for much when they have plenty. You have a good heart, Mija, but goodness without wisdom can lead to pain. Use this money to create the life you've always wanted, but remember that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought. I chose you because you understand the value of both work and dreams, because you have shown kindness without expecting reward, and because I believe you will honor the sacrifices that created this inheritance by building something beautiful with it. Con amor, siempre. Abuela Rosa. P.S. The investment accounts are managed by Thompson Financial Services. Mr. Richard Thompson has been my advisor for 15 years and will help you understand your options. Trust him, but remember that the final decisions must always be yours. I sat in that leather chair, reading Rosa's letter again and again, while Attorney Patterson waited patiently for me to process the magnitude of what had just happened. The money was overwhelming, but the letter revealed something even more significant. Rosa had been watching our family dynamics for years, making careful judgments about character and priorities that would ultimately determine how her life's work would be distributed. She left everyone else small bequests. Patterson explained when I finally looked up from the letter. Your father, aunt, and uncle each received $10,000. Your cousins received $5,000 each. But the bulk of the estate, the house, investments, and insurance, all goes to you. I learned that Rosa had been far more financially sophisticated than anyone in the family realized. She had started investing in the 1970s with small amounts saved from her various jobs, gradually building a diverse portfolio of mutual funds and individual stocks that had grown steadily over decades of patient accumulation. She had owned her house free and clear for over 20 years, continuing to live modestly while the property appreciated in value along with Denver's real estate boom. She had maintained multiple savings accounts and certificates of deposit, spreading her assets across different institutions in ways that suggested careful research and planning. Most surprisingly, she had purchased a substantial life insurance policy in the 1980s and had been paying premiums faithfully for decades, understanding that this would provide tax-free income to her beneficiary while requiring only modest monthly payments during her working years. The total picture that emerged from these documents was of a woman who had understood money and investing far better than anyone in our family had realized. Rosa had built wealth through discipline, patience, and financial literacy that she had never displayed openly. Perhaps because she knew that visible prosperity would change how family members related to her. What happens now? I asked Patterson, still struggling to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. The estate needs to go through probate, which will take approximately 4 to 6 months given the complexity of the assets involved. During that time, you'll need to make some decisions about how you want to manage the investments and whether you want to keep or sell the house. He provided me with contact information for Rosa's financial advisor and recommended that I schedule a meeting within the next few weeks to understand the investment portfolio and discuss management options. Your grandmother also left specific instructions that no one else in the family should be informed about the extent of the bequest to you until after probate is complete. She wanted you to have time to adjust to your new circumstances before dealing with potential family reactions. As I left the law office with a folder full of financial documents that represented more money than I had ever imagined possessing, I felt overwhelmed by a mixture of grief, gratitude, disbelief, and profound uncertainty about what to do next. The drive home took me through neighborhoods that suddenly looked different through the lens of financial security. The expensive restaurants I had always avoided were now places I could afford to eat regularly. The luxury apartment buildings I had admired were now within my reach. The art supply store that had represented monthly budgeting decisions was now a place where I could buy anything I wanted without consideration for cost. But rather than feeling excited about these possibilities, I felt anxious and isolated. This secret was too large to carry alone. But Rosa's warning about people seeing opportunity rather than family echoed in my mind every time I considered sharing the news. That evening, I sat in my tiny apartment, surrounded by paperwork that represented a complete transformation of my life's possibilities. But I felt more confused than celebratory. The inheritance solved every financial problem I had ever worried about, but it created new challenges that I had never considered. My first instinct was to call Jasmine to share this incredible news with the one person who had witnessed my struggles and would genuinely celebrate my good fortune. But something held me back. Perhaps Rosa's warnings, perhaps my own need to process this information before involving anyone else in its implications. I made a simple dinner and tried to continue my normal evening routine, but everything felt different. The cramped apartment that had been my reality for 3 years suddenly felt like a choice rather than a necessity. The careful budget calculations that had structured every decision were suddenly irrelevant. The anxiety about monthly bills that had been my constant companion was replaced by different anxieties about responsibility and family dynamics. I found myself walking through the apartment, looking at furniture I had bought secondhand, clothes I had worn for years, kitchen supplies I had accumulated gradually over time. These possessions had represented careful resource management and making do with what I could afford. Now, they felt like artifacts from a previous life that was ending whether I was ready or not. The most challenging aspect was the isolation imposed by secrecy. I couldn't share this news with family members who had supported me, couldn't celebrate with friends who would understand the significance, couldn't even begin planning for the future because doing so would require explaining resources I wasn't supposed to have. I spent that first night reading through Rosa's investment statements, trying to understand the portfolio she had built over decades of patient accumulation. There were blue-chip stocks she had held for 20 years, mutual funds focused on steady growth rather than spectacular gains, bonds that provided reliable income, and real estate investment trusts that had appreciated along with the overall market. The sophistication of her investment strategy was remarkable for someone who had presented herself as a simple working woman focused on basic financial security. She had understood diversification, dollar-cost averaging, and the power of compound interest in ways that suggested extensive self-education and careful planning. Each statement told part of the story of her financial discipline, small monthly investments that had grown into substantial holdings, dividends that had been reinvested rather than spent, and the overall approach that prioritized long-term wealth building over immediate gratification. But the statements also revealed the cost of her frugality. Rosa had accumulated this wealth by denying herself pleasures and experiences that the money could have provided during her lifetime. She had driven old cars when she could have afforded new ones, lived in the same small house when she could have upgraded to something larger, and maintained a modest lifestyle even as her net worth grew into the millions. This realization added complexity to my gratitude for her gift. Rosa had sacrificed her own comfort and enjoyment to create an inheritance that would benefit me. But she had also missed opportunities to travel, to help family members during her lifetime, and to enjoy the security that her careful planning had created. The next few days passed in a strange suspended reality, where I continued my normal routine while processing information that made that routine feel temporary and meaningless. I went to work, handled client revisions, and participated in office meetings while privately knowing that I no longer needed this job for financial survival. My colleagues' complaints about money took on different significance when I knew I could solve their problems with what would now be considered small amounts from my inheritance. Jennifer's stress about her car payment, Tyler's concerns about student loan debt, even Marcus's worries about the agency's cash flow, all of these issues that had seemed significant and relatable now felt manageable and distant. But I couldn't offer help without revealing my changed circumstances, and I wasn't ready to deal with the complications that disclosure would create in my work relationships. The most difficult aspect was maintaining normal interactions with family members who continued to treat me as the struggling graphic designer who had always been available to provide financial assistance when they needed it. Isabella called during this period, asking for advice about a credit card debt problem, and I had to resist the impulse to offer solutions that would have revealed my new resources. Carlos mentioned during a family dinner that he and Maria were concerned about their mortgage payments now that she had lost her job. And I found myself calculating how easily I could solve their problem while saying nothing about my ability to help. My father complained about needed repairs to his truck that he couldn't afford, and I had to listen sympathetically while knowing that I could buy him a new vehicle without affecting my own financial security. These conversations created internal tension between my desire to help people I cared about and my need to protect the secret until I better understood its implications for my relationships with them. 2 weeks after the meeting with Attorney Patterson, I was still struggling with the isolation imposed by secrecy and the growing realization that this inheritance would fundamentally change how family members related to me once they learned about it. During one of my regular coffee meetings with Jasmine, I found myself discussing family dynamics in hypothetical terms, trying to process my concerns without revealing their source. Have you ever wondered who in your family actually cares about you as a person versus who just maintains relationships because they might benefit from them someday? I asked, stirring my coffee absently while watching other customers at nearby tables. Jasmine considered the question thoughtfully. I think about that sometimes, especially when I see how differently my parents treat my brother, who's a doctor, compared to how they treat me as a teacher. But why are you thinking about this now? I explained in general terms that recent events had made me more conscious of patterns in my family relationships. The way certain people reached out when they needed something, but were unavailable when I might need support. The way financial assistance flowed in one direction, without acknowledgement or reciprocity. The only way to really know who cares about you, Jasmine said, echoing her earlier observation, is to see who shows up when you need them but have nothing to offer in return. This conversation crystallized an idea that had been forming since I received the inheritance. What if there was a way to test my family's genuine concern for my well-being before they knew about the money? What if I could create a scenario where I needed emotional and practical support but had nothing material to offer in return? The concept was both simple and potentially devastating. I would fabricate a personal crisis that required family support, not financial help, but time, attention, and emotional availability. I would tell different family members the same story and carefully document their responses, creating a clear picture of who was willing to prioritize my needs when I was vulnerable and had nothing to give back. The beauty of this approach was that it required no money from them, just genuine care and presence. It would reveal who saw family obligations as reciprocal relationships versus who viewed me primarily as a resource to be utilized when convenient. Over the following days, I crafted the details of my fictional crisis carefully. I would tell everyone that I was going through a difficult breakup with a long-term boyfriend named Alex, a relationship I would claim to have kept private because I wasn't sure about its long-term potential. The story would focus on emotional struggles, depression, anxiety, difficulty sleeping, and concentrating that were affecting my work and daily functioning. I would specifically request emotional support and presence, rather than financial assistance, making it clear that what I needed was family members' time and attention during a difficult period. This approach would eliminate financial barriers to helping me while revealing whether family members were willing to make personal sacrifices to provide emotional support. It would test their availability, their empathy, and their willingness to prioritize my needs when I couldn't reciprocate. I made a list of everyone I would approach with this fabricated crisis. My parents, Elena and Roberto, my stepfather, David, my siblings, Carlos and Isabella, my aunt, Carmen, my uncle, Miguel, and his wife, Patricia, my cousin, Diego, and several family friends who had been part of my support system over the years. Based on past experiences with these relationships, I made predictions about how each person would respond. My mother, Elena, would probably express concern, but find reasons why she couldn't provide ongoing support, particularly if it conflicted with David's plans or preferences. My father, Roberto, would offer practical advice, but struggle with emotional conversations, potentially suggesting that I handle the situation independently rather than needing family support. David would politely deflect, making it clear that my emotional needs were not his responsibility despite his marriage to my mother. Carlos would offer superficial support, but prioritize his own family's needs and schedule, treating my crisis as less important than his established commitments. Isabella would somehow make the conversation about her own problems, using my crisis as an opportunity to discuss her own relationship drama without providing reciprocal support. Uncle Miguel and Patricia would probably lecture me about making better life choices rather than offering comfort during a difficult time. Diego would promise support, but fail to follow through, as he had done with previous commitments to family members. The only person I had genuine hope for was Aunt Carmen, who had consistently shown up for family members, despite her own financial constraints and busy schedule. My prediction was that most family members would offer token sympathy, but find reasons to avoid providing meaningful support, while Carmen would immediately make herself available, despite the personal cost in terms of time and energy. I decided to start the experiment on a Saturday morning, beginning with phone calls to immediate family members before expanding to extended relatives. The timing would allow me to reach people when they were likely to be available for longer conversations and not distracted by work obligations. My first call was to my mother, Elena, who I reached just as she was finishing her morning coffee and preparing for a day of errands with David. "Mani, I need to talk to you about something important," I began, allowing genuine emotion to creep into my voice as I thought about Rosa's recent death and the weight of the secret I was carrying. "Of course, mija. What's wrong? You sound upset." I launched into my carefully prepared story about Alex, the fictitious boyfriend whose recent departure from my life had left me struggling with depression and anxiety. I described sleepless nights, difficulty concentrating at work, and a general sense of being overwhelmed by sadness that I couldn't shake on my own. As I spoke, I could hear genuine concern in Elena's voice. She asked thoughtful questions about the relationship, how long we'd been together, why I hadn't mentioned him before, what had led to the breakup. Her interest seemed authentic, and for a moment I felt hopeful that she might be different from what I expected. "Oh, Sofia, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Breakups are always difficult, especially when you've invested emotionally in someone. Why didn't you tell me about Alex before? I feel like I don't know what's going on in your life." I explained that I had kept the relationship private because, I wasn't sure where it was heading, and now I was grateful that I hadn't introduced him to the family since the ending had been so painful. I described feeling isolated and overwhelmed, struggling to get through each day while maintaining professional obligations. I was hoping maybe you could come over this weekend or we could spend some time together. I just don't want to be alone right now with these thoughts and feelings. The pause that followed was subtle, but significant. I could almost hear Elena's mental calculation of competing priorities and obligations. Oh, honey, this weekend is really challenging for us. David and I are supposed to drive up to look at that vacation property in Aspen, remember? We've had this trip planned for months, and the realtor has set up appointments that would be difficult to reschedule. My heart sank, but I pressed on, hoping to find some alternative that might work within their schedule. What about next weekend then? Or maybe we could just have lunch together one day during the week. I don't need a big time commitment, just some connection with family while I'm working through this. Well, let me check my calendar, Elena said, though her tone suggested that she was already looking for reasons why various times wouldn't work. I've been picking up extra shifts at the hospital to help save for the vacation, and David has all these appointments with contractors and suppliers for his current projects. ... Her voice trailed off in a way that suggested she was hoping I would understand and not push for specific commitments. You know, Sophia, maybe you should consider talking to someone professional about this. The hospital has an employee assistance program that provides counseling services, and I could probably get you connected with someone who specializes in relationship issues and depression. That might be more helpful than anything I could do. I felt the familiar sting of being redirected toward professional solutions rather than family support, but I tried one more approach. I appreciate that suggestion, Mommy, but right now I just need people who love me to be present while I work through this. I need to feel connected to family, not like I have to handle everything on my own. Of course I'll love you, Sophia. You know that. But I'm not sure what I can actually do to help with a breakup. These things happen to everyone, and eventually you move on and find someone better. You're young and attractive. I'm sure there are other men out there who would appreciate you. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Elena offering generic advice about staying positive, keeping busy, and not letting one relationship failure define my self-worth. She promised to call later in the week to check on me, but something in her tone suggested this was the kind of promise that would be forgotten once her immediate concerns took precedence. After hanging up, I made detailed notes about the conversation in a journal I had started specifically for this experiment. Elena had expressed initial concern and asked appropriate questions. But when it came to providing concrete support that might inconvenience her or conflict with existing plans, she had immediately looked for alternatives that would require minimal personal sacrifice. The pattern was exactly what I had expected based on past interactions, but experiencing it in the context of this fabricated crisis made the rejection feel more stark and painful than usual. The next day, I called my father Roberto, reaching him at his apartment on a Sunday afternoon when he was likely to have time for a longer conversation. "Papa, I'm going through a really difficult time, and I could use your support," I began, using the same emotional tone that had characterized my call with Elena. Roberto listened carefully as I told him the story about Alex and my struggles with the aftermath of the relationship. His response was immediately focused on problem-solving rather than emotional support, which was consistent with his general approach to difficult situations. "Sophia, you need to stop thinking about this guy and focus on your career and future. This is exactly why I've always told you not to get too serious about relationships at your age. You should be establishing yourself professionally before you worry about settling down with someone. I understand that advice, Papa, but right now I'm not looking for relationship guidance. I just need someone to be there for me emotionally while I work through these feelings. What you need is to stay busy and productive. Take on more projects at work, join a gym, find some hobbies that will keep your mind occupied. Sitting around feeling sorry for yourself isn't going to solve anything." I tried to explain that I wasn't wallowing in self-pity, but rather experiencing genuine emotional distress that would benefit from family support and connection. But Roberto seemed uncomfortable with the emotional aspect of my request and kept redirecting toward practical solutions. Look, mija, I'm not good with these feelings conversations. That's more your mother's area of expertise. But if you need money for therapy or some practical help getting your life back on track, I can help with that kind of thing. I don't need money, Papa. I need my family to be emotionally present during a difficult time. I need to feel like I'm not handling this crisis completely alone. You're not alone. I'm here talking to you right now, and I'm giving you good advice. You just need to be strong and focus on moving forward. That's what I had to do after your mother and I divorced, and it's what successful people do when life doesn't go according to plan. The conversation ended with Roberto promising to take me out for dinner sometime in the next few weeks, but like Elena's promise to call, this felt more like a gesture meant to end an uncomfortable conversation than a genuine commitment to ongoing support. My conversation with David, my stepfather, was mercifully brief because he made his position clear within the first few minutes. Sofia, I'm sorry you're having a hard time, but I think this is something you should discuss with your mother, or maybe a counselor. I'm not really the right person for this kind of conversation. He suggested that I focus on work and staying busy, offered to recommend a therapist whose services were covered by his company's health plan, though I wasn't eligible for those benefits, and quickly changed the subject to asking about my job and whether I was still enjoying graphic design work. The call lasted less than 10 minutes, and David made it clear that my emotional well-being was not something he considered his responsibility. Despite being married to my mother for over a decade and having been part of my extended family throughout my 20s, his response was exactly what I had expected. But it still stung to have family boundaries drawn so explicitly when I was supposedly in crisis. My call to Carlos was scheduled for a weeknight when I knew he would be home from work, but before his children's bedtime routines made longer conversations impossible. As the family's success story and my younger brother, I had hoped his protective instincts might override his busy schedule and tendency toward practical rather than emotional responses. Carlos, I'm dealing with some personal issues, and I could really use my big brother right now, I said, consciously appealing to his sense of family responsibility and the protective role he had sometimes played during our childhood. He listened to my story about Alex and the breakup with what seemed like genuine attention, asking thoughtful questions about the relationship timeline, what had gone wrong, and how I was coping with the emotional aftermath. His questions felt more engaged than our parents' responses, and I allowed myself to hope that he might offer more substantial support. That sounds really tough, Sophie. Breakups are never easy, especially when you've invested a lot of time and emotional energy in someone. It's completely normal to feel overwhelmed and sad after something like this. His validation felt good, so different from Roberto's immediate focus on moving forward or Elena's rush toward professional solutions. Carlos seemed to understand that I needed acknowledgement of my pain before I could consider practical steps for healing. I was hoping maybe we could spend some time together over the next few weeks. I just need family around me right now, people who care about me and can help me feel less alone while I work through this. The shift in Carlos's tone was subtle but noticeable. Where he had been warm and engaged while listening to my problem, discussing solutions that might require his time and energy brought a different quality to his voice. Well, this weekend is completely packed for us. Maria's parents are visiting from Phoenix, and we have the kids' soccer games on Saturday morning, plus birthday parties for 2 of their classmates in the afternoon. Sunday, we're committed to that couple's retreat at our church. What about sometime during the week? We could meet for coffee after work, or maybe I could come over for dinner one evening. Weeknights are really challenging with our schedule. Maria's been working extra hours to make up for the income she lost when her company downsized, so I'm handling more of the kids' activities and homework supervision. Plus, she's been dealing with some anxiety about her job situation. So I'm trying to be really present and supportive for her right now. The irony of Carlos prioritizing his wife's emotional needs while dismissing mine wasn't lost on me, but I pressed on. hoping to find some compromise that might work within their family obligations. I understand that you're busy, Carlos, but this is important. I'm really struggling here, more than I've struggled with anything in a long time. I know, and I'm sorry you're going through this. But honestly, Sophie, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to focus on yourself and figure out what you really want in life. You've always been so focused on other people. This guy, helping family members with their problems, trying to please everyone around you. Maybe being single for a while would be healthy and give you space to work on your own goals. Carlos continued with a philosophical monologue about relationships, personal growth, and the importance of self-reliance that felt more like a TED Talk than a conversation between siblings. He suggested that I join a gym, take up running, maybe consider online dating when I felt ready to meet new people. And if you need someone to talk to regularly while you're processing all this, therapy might be a really good investment. Maria's been seeing a counselor for her work-related anxiety, and it's made a huge difference in how she handles stress. Like everyone else, he was quick to suggest professional help rather than family support, despite the fact that I was specifically asking for connection with people who supposedly loved me unconditionally. The conversation ended with vague promises to find time soon for a coffee or phone call, but no specific commitments that would require Carlos to prioritize my needs over his established routine. My sister Isabella's response was perhaps the most predictable and the most painful because it so perfectly illustrated the self-centeredness that had characterized our relationship throughout our adult lives. When I called her with my story about the breakup and emotional struggles, she immediately launched into her own relationship drama without pausing to offer support or even acknowledge the severity of what I was supposedly experiencing. Oh my God, Sophia, that's so awful. You know, I just went through something really similar with Kevin. Did I tell you what happened last weekend? We were supposed to go to his friend's wedding together, and then suddenly he decides that he needs space to think about our relationship. For the next 25 minutes, Isabella detailed every aspect of her latest romantic crisis. Kevin's confusing mixed signals, her analysis of his psychological issues based on things his ex-girlfriend had supposedly said, her theories about why men in their 30s were afraid of commitment, and her plans for winning him back through strategic social media posts and carefully timed text messages. Every time I tried to redirect the conversation back to my supposed crisis, Isabella would acknowledge my pain briefly before diving back into her own problems with renewed energy. I totally understand what you're going through. It's so hard when someone you care about just doesn't appreciate everything you do for them. Like with Kevin, I've been so supportive of his music career, and I even helped him move his equipment when his band got that gig at the downtown venue. But then when I needed him to be my date for my friend's baby shower, suddenly he was too busy to commit to social plans. A pattern continued throughout our conversation. Isabella would relate my experiences to her own, but always in ways that made her situation seem more dramatic, more unfair, or more worthy of sympathy. She never asked follow-up questions about my emotional state, never offered specific support, and never paused her own narrative long enough to focus on what I might need from her. "You should definitely come out with me and my friends this weekend," she finally said, as if she were offering a generous solution to my problems. "We're going to that new salsa club downtown, the one that just opened in the old warehouse district. Dancing always makes me feel better after relationship drama, and maybe you'll meet someone new." When I explained that I wasn't in the mood for clubbing and was hoping for quieter, more intimate time with family members who could provide emotional support, Isabella seemed genuinely confused and slightly annoyed. "I don't know what else you want me to do, Sophia. I'm offering to include you in my plans and introduce you to my friend group. Sometimes you just need to push through the sadness and force yourself to have fun. That's what I'm doing with the Kevin situation." The call ended with Isabella promising to text me details about the club outing, which I knew would never happen, and generic assurances that everything happens for a reason and I would be better off without him. Advice that required no knowledge of my situation and no personal investment in my well-being. After documenting Isabella's response in my journal, I realized that her reaction had been exactly what I should have expected, based on 29 years of experience with her self-absorbed approach to relationships. But experiencing it in the context of this experiment made the pattern more stark and painful than usual. My Uncle Miguel's response to my fabricated crisis was a masterclass in condescension disguised as concern. When I called him about my emotional struggles following the supposed breakup, he listened with barely concealed impatience before launching into a standard lecture about personal responsibility and making better life choices. Sofia, this is exactly why I've always been concerned about your lifestyle and decision-making. You're almost 30 years old, and you're still having dramatic emotional reactions to normal life events like relationship endings. When are you going to start acting like a mature adult? I'm not asking for judgment about my choices, Tio Miguel. I'm asking for emotional support from family during a difficult time. What you need is a reality check, not people enabling your tendency to fall apart every time something doesn't go your way. Successful people don't let breakups derail their lives or their professional responsibilities. They learn from their mistakes and move forward with better judgment. The conversation devolved into Miguel criticizing my career choice. Graphic design is not a stable profession for someone who wants financial security. My living situation, you should have been saving to buy property instead of throwing money away on rent. And my general approach to adult responsibilities, you need to focus on building wealth and professional credentials instead of chasing artistic dreams. His wife, Patricia, got on the phone briefly to echo his sentiments with additional commentary about my need to get serious about life and consider moving back home with one of my parents until I could develop a more practical approach to career and financial planning. Neither Miguel nor Patricia offered any emotional support, suggested spending time together, or acknowledged that I might be experiencing legitimate pain that deserved family compassion. Instead, they treated my crisis as evidence of character flaws that needed correction rather than temporary difficulties requiring support. My cousin Diego initially seemed more sympathetic than his parents. Listening to my story about the breakup and expressing what appeared to be genuine concern about my emotional state. That really sucks, Sophie. Breakups are the worst, especially when you really cared about the person and thought the relationship was going somewhere. Thank you for understanding. I was hoping maybe we could hang out sometime this week or next weekend. I just don't want to be alone with my thoughts right now, and I could use some family connection while I work through this. Yeah, absolutely. Let me check my schedule and get back to you. I think I'm free Thursday or Friday evening, or maybe we could do something during the weekend. Diego promised to call me back within a day or two to make concrete plans, and I felt a small surge of hope that at least one family member would follow through on their offer of support. Thursday came and went without any communication from Diego. Friday passed without a phone call. The weekend arrived with no text messages or attempts to reschedule our tentative plans. When I finally reached out to him the following Tuesday, Diego apologized profusely and explained that he'd been super busy with work projects and social commitments, but he promised to call soon to reschedule our time together. He never did. Like so many promises from family members over the years, his offer of support evaporated the moment it required actual effort or sacrifice on his part. After more than a week of disappointing conversations with immediate and extended family members, I was emotionally drained, but not entirely surprised. The people I had helped financially and emotionally over the years were suddenly unavailable when I needed them to reciprocate that support. But there was one call left to make, and this was the conversation I was most nervous about, because it was the one that mattered most to me. I called Aunt Carmen on a Sunday evening, knowing she would be home after her weekend catering job, but before she needed to prepare for the upcoming week's responsibilities. Sophie, mi amor, how are you? I was just thinking about you earlier today while I was cleaning up after the Gonzalez family's anniversary party. The warmth in Carmen's voice was immediately different from every other conversation I'd had during this experiment. There was genuine pleasure in hearing from me, as if my call was a welcome interruption rather than an inconvenience to be managed. I told her the same story about Alex and my struggles with depression and anxiety following the breakup, and her response was immediate and wholehearted. "Oh, Mia, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Heartbreak is one of the hardest things we experience in life, and it affects everything: how we sleep, how we eat, how we see ourselves and the world around us." Unlike everyone else, Carmen focused immediately on my well-being, rather than offering quick solutions or changing the subject. She asked specific questions about how I was taking care of myself physically and emotionally, whether I was eating regular meals, if I was getting any sleep, and whether I had support from friends and coworkers. "Are you able to focus at work, or is this affecting your ability to concentrate on projects? Sometimes when we're heartbroken, it's hard to do the things we normally do well." Her questions demonstrated understanding that emotional pain has practical implications and that healing requires attention to both psychological and physical needs. "I was hoping maybe we could spend some time together this week," I said, feeling nervous about making this request because Carmen's positive response had become so important to me. "I just need family right now, people who care about me and can help me feel less alone." "Of course, sweetheart. What day works best for you? I can cook for you, maybe that pozole you love, or we could make tamales together if you want something to keep your hands busy while we talk." Ana would love to see you too, and she always has good perspective on life and relationships. Carmen didn't hesitate, didn't mention her busy schedule or financial constraints, didn't suggest that I handle the situation on my own. She immediately began making plans to provide comfort and care during my difficult time. "What about Tuesday evening? I finish my hotel shift at 4, so I could have dinner ready by 6 if you want to come over. Or if you prefer, we could meet somewhere else, whatever feels most comfortable for you right now." "Are you sure it's not too much trouble? I know you work so hard, and I don't want to impose on your time with Anna." "Impose? Sofia, you are family. This is what family does. We take care of each other when life gets difficult. Anna has homework and guitar practice, but she can do those things while we visit. I'll also call in sick from the hotel on Wednesday if you need someone to talk to during the day." I was stunned. Carmen was offering to miss work, which meant losing money she desperately needed, just to be available for emotional support during my fictional crisis. "Carmen, you absolutely don't need to miss work for me. I just need to know that someone cares enough to make time for me." "I care, mija. I care so much it hurts my heart to think of you struggling alone with these feelings. And sometimes caring means making sacrifices for the people we love." Our conversation continued for another hour and a half, with Carmen sharing stories about her own difficult breakups, offering genuine wisdom about healing from heartbreak, and creating space for me to express pain without trying to rush me through the process or minimize my feelings. She didn't suggest quick fixes or professional solutions. Instead, she focused on providing emotional presence and assuring me that my feelings were valid and temporary. "You have such a good heart, Sofia. You give so much to everyone around you, and anyone who doesn't appreciate that doesn't deserve the gift of your love. But right now, just focus on taking care of yourself and letting the people who truly love you help you through this." As we made specific plans for Tuesday dinner, I felt overwhelmed by the contrast between Carmen's response and everyone else's reactions. Here was someone who worked two physically demanding jobs, raised a teenager alone, and lived paycheck to paycheck. Yet she was willing to sacrifice income and comfort to provide emotional support for her niece. Meanwhile, family members with comfortable incomes, flexible schedules, and fewer responsibilities had all found reasons why they couldn't be present during my supposed crisis. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment crying, not from sadness about my fictional breakup, but from the profound realization of how differently my family members valued our relationships. The people who had the most resources to offer support had been the least willing to provide it, while the person with the least to spare had offered everything she could. The dinner at Carmen's apartment was both beautiful and heartbreaking. She had prepared not just pozole, but all my favorite side dishes. And she had bought ingredients for tres leches cake despite the extra expense that this represented in her carefully managed budget. As we ate and talked, Carmen's daughter Anna joined us, offering her own perspective on heartbreak and relationships with the mature wisdom of a 17-year-old who had watched her mother navigate single parenthood with grace and strength. Mom always says that people show you who they really are when you need them most, Anna said, unknowingly summarizing the entire lesson of my experiment. The ones who stick around when things are hard are the ones worth keeping in your life. After dinner, Carmen insisted that I take home leftovers and made me promise to call her if I had trouble sleeping or needed to talk during the week. She also gave me a small hand-painted stone that she had bought from one of her hotel guests who made them as a side business. "This is for strength and healing," she said, pressing the smooth stone into my palm. "Keep it with you and remember that you are loved and worthy of love, no matter what anyone else does or says." As I drove home with containers of food and a heart full of gratitude, I knew I had to tell Carmen the truth about everything: the inheritance, the experiment, and what her response had meant to me. The following weekend, I invited Carmen to my apartment for dinner, determined to finally share my secret with the one person who had proven she deserved to know it. "Carmen, I need to tell you something important," I began as we settled on my couch with cups of coffee after our meal. "That story I told you about Alex and the breakup, it wasn't true." Her expression remained calm and open, waiting for me to continue without judgment or surprise. "I made it up because I wanted to see how different family members would react if I needed help but had nothing to offer them in return." Carmen nodded slowly, processing this information. "I see. And what did you learn?" "I learned that you're the only person in our family who truly understands what love and family loyalty mean." I told her about all the other conversations I'd had: the excuses from my parents, the philosophical lectures from Carlos, Isabella's self-absorption, Miguel's condescension, Diego's empty promises. I explained how disappointed and hurt I had been by everyone else's responses, and how her immediate willingness to help had restored my faith in genuine family bonds. "But there's something else you need to know," I continued, taking a deep breath. 3 months ago, Abuela Rosa left me her entire estate. I inherited almost $3 million. Carmen's eyes whitened slightly, but she remained silent, allowing me to continue. "I haven't told anyone else because I was afraid of how it would change things. Rosa warned me in her letter that people might see opportunity instead of family. And I realized I needed to know who cared about me before they knew about the money." "And now you know," Carmen said quietly. "Now I know. And I want you to understand that your response to my fake crisis had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with who you are as a person. You offered to sacrifice work hours and income to help someone you thought was in emotional pain. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." We talked for hours that night about money, family dynamics, and the ways wealth can complicate relationships. Carmen shared stories about her own experiences with financial struggles and the difficult choices she had made to maintain her dignity while accepting help when necessary. "I want to help you and Anna," I told her. "I want to pay off your debts, help with Anna's college expenses, maybe help you start that catering business you've always dreamed about. But I want to do it in a way that honors your independence and doesn't make you feel diminished." Carmen smiled but shook her head gently. "Sofia, I don't need you to rescue me. Anna and I are proud of the life we've built together, through our own efforts. But if you want to help, maybe you could contribute to Anna's college fund. Education is the one gift that can never be taken away, and it would mean everything to know she has more options." Her response was perfectly consistent with who she had always been: proud but practical, thinking of her daughter's future rather than her own immediate comfort. Over the following months, I quietly established a college fund for Anna and arranged for Carmen's medical bills and car repairs to be paid through anonymous beneficiary programs I set up through local charities. Carmen never knew the source of these gifts, and I preferred it that way. I also began the process of redesigning my own life with the freedom that Rosa's inheritance had provided. I left my job at Creative Solutions and started my own design studio, focusing on projects that aligned with my values, nonprofits, small businesses, and artists who needed quality design work but couldn't afford big agency prices. The financial security allowed me to choose clients based on passion rather than desperation, and my work became more fulfilling than it had ever been when I was constrained by economic necessity. I moved into a beautiful house with large windows and a dedicated art studio where I could finally work on the paintings I had dreamed about for years. But the most meaningful change was that Carmen and Anna lived just a few blocks away in a small house I had quietly purchased and arranged for them to rent at below-market rates through a housing assistance program I had established. My relationship with the rest of my family settled into a polite but distant pattern. We attended the same holiday gatherings and maintained cordial surface conversations, but the depth of connection I had once hoped for was no longer something I pursued. When family members experienced genuine crises, I found ways to help anonymously, paying medical bills through hospital charity funds, making donations to cover unexpected expenses, ensuring that needs were met while pride remained intact. They never knew the source of these gifts, which allowed me to maintain my boundaries while still honoring my values of compassion and generosity. Isabella eventually found stability with a partner who appreciated her strengths and helped her address her impulsive tendencies. Carlos and Maria weathered their financial difficulties and strengthened their marriage in the process. My parents continued their separate lives, occasionally wondering aloud why I seemed more distant, but never making the effort to bridge that gap themselves. The most beautiful outcome was watching Anna flourish with educational opportunities that had previously been out of reach. She received a full scholarship to study engineering at a prestigious university, supplemented by the college fund I had quietly established. Carmen's catering business grew steadily, and she maintained her fierce independence while accepting small amounts of help in ways that preserved her dignity. One evening, as we sat on Carmen's front porch, watching Anna practice driving in their quiet neighborhood, she shared a reflection that captured the entire lesson of my inheritance test. "You know what I've learned over the years?" Carmen said, watching her daughter navigate a three-point turn with careful concentration. "Money doesn't change people. It just reveals who they always were." She was right. The inheritance hadn't transformed anyone's character. It had simply provided a lens through which I could see existing patterns and priorities more clearly. Those who had always been selfish remained focused on their own needs, while those who had always been generous continued to give freely, even when they had little to spare. 2 years later, my life had stabilized into patterns that reflected both the opportunities created by Rose's gift and the wisdom I had gained from testing my family's loyalty. I had learned to distinguish between relationships based on genuine care and those motivated by potential benefit. The inheritance had given me something more valuable than financial security. It had provided clarity about which relationships deserved my emotional investment and trust. I no longer felt guilty about setting boundaries with family members who had demonstrated that they viewed me primarily as a resource rather than a person worthy of care and support. But I had also learned that genuine love does exist, even when it's rare. Carmen and Anna had become the family I chose rather than the family I was born into, and their presence in my life reminded me daily that authentic relationships are possible when they're built on mutual respect and care. My art had flourished in the studio that financial freedom had made possible. I was painting larger canvases, experimenting with techniques that required expensive materials, and beginning to show my work in local galleries. The creative fulfillment that had seemed impossible when I was struggling financially had become a central part of my identity. I had also begun teaching art classes for low-income children through a program I funded anonymously, creating opportunities for young people to explore creativity without the financial barriers that had once limited my own artistic development. The most profound change was in my relationship with money itself. Growing up with financial instability had taught me to view money as a source of anxiety and conflict. But Rose's inheritance had shown me that wealth could be a tool for creating beauty supporting others, and building the life I had always imagined. I have learned to use money wisely but not fearfully, to be generous without being taken advantage of, and to find joy in financial security without becoming complacent or entitled. I often think about what Rosa really left me. The money was transformative, but the greater gift was the opportunity to understand the difference between conditional and unconditional love. The experiment had been painful, revealing truths about my family that I might have preferred not to know, but it had also revealed the extraordinary generosity of spirit that existed in Carmen. And it had taught me to value authenticity over obligation in my relationships. Rosa's final letter had warned me that people might see opportunity rather than family, and she had been right about most of my relatives. But she had also trusted me to use her gift wisely, and I believe I had honored that trust by choosing to build my new life around genuine relationships rather than trying to buy love or approval from people who had already shown me their priorities. The inheritance test had revealed that the most valuable things in life truly cannot be bought. Compassion, loyalty, and genuine care are gifts that people choose to give freely, and no amount of money can purchase them from those who don't possess them naturally. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money at all. It's the wisdom to recognize authentic love when you find it, and the courage to build your life around the people who see and value who you truly are. My grandmother's gift had bought me freedom, but my family's responses to my test had taught me how to use that freedom wisely. I had learned that being wealthy meant nothing if I was surrounded by people who only cared about what I could give them, and that being truly rich meant having relationships based on mutual love and respect. In the end, the money had simply been a tool that revealed what was already there, the selfishness of some family members and the extraordinary generosity of others. Rosa's true gift was not the inheritance itself, but the opportunity to discover who in my life was worthy of my trust and love. 3 years later, as I sit in my art studio painting a portrait of Carmen and Ana laughing in their garden, I feel profound gratitude, not just for the financial security that makes this life possible, but for the clarity that allows me to appreciate the relationships that make it meaningful. The inheritance had been meant to secure my future, but the experiment had secured something even more valuable: my peace of mind and my understanding of what family really means. This story explores themes that many of us face in our own families and relationships. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more content about family dynamics, financial psychology, and personal growth. Your support helps me continue sharing stories that matter. Please like this post if you found it meaningful, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to test someone's loyalty in your life? What methods did you use? And what did you discover about the people you thought you could count on? Do you think Sofia's test was fair, or was it manipulative? Is there a difference between testing people's character and deceiving them? Which family member's response surprised you the most? Did any of their reactions remind you of people in your own life? How do you think money changes family dynamics? Have you witnessed relationships change when someone's financial situation improved dramatically? Was Sofia right to keep the inheritance secret from most of her family? What would you have done in her situation? What do you think about Carmen's response when she learned the truth? How did her reaction to Sofia's honesty reflect her character? Do you believe that money reveals who people really are, as Carmen said? Can you think of examples from your own experience? How would you have handled this situation if you were in Sofia's position? Would you have conducted a similar test, or would you have taken a different approach? What role do you think cultural expectations about family obligations played in this story? How do different cultures view family financial responsibilities? Looking at your own relationships, who are the people who show up for you when you need them, but have nothing to offer in return? How do you recognize and appreciate these genuine connections? Share your experiences and insights in the comments. I read every response and often feature thoughtful comments in future content.